Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for the session Living in an Age of Algorithmic Culture. I'm afraid that you probably already know that we can't be joined by Martin Dodge today because although it's the snow's finished here, up in the hills in Buxton where he lives, they have about 40 centimetres, so I think that's a valid excuse for not getting here. Or perhaps he should get huskies or something like that. Valiantly standing in for Martin is Usman, but we are joined by Farida Viz, who's from the University of Sheffield, and basically the session is looking at how our interactions are mediated by computer code, how the algorithm is starting to determine our choices, and how algorithms act as intermediating agents and filters for our experience. And these are invisible for the most part. And it's how do we make these algorithms, these things that determine a lot of action and a lot of ways things are delivered to us, more visible, readable, and accountable. And so we're looking at that kind of social reality defined by algorithms. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Farida.
Thank you. Okay, so some of my presentation, unfortunately, was planning for Martin to be here because I was hoping that he would take care of the code space stuff and give a really rounded introduction to the ways in which algorithms are shaping our lives in all sorts of different ways, and that I could work sort of from his presentation and give examples of a number of case studies and a number of different papers I'm writing where I've noticed when you see the algorithm, when the algorithm reveals itself. And what I very much like about some of Martin's work, both in CodeSpace and in this very nice edited volume called Rethinking Mapping, is the points at which you might study the algorithm. And one of the things that he argues with his co-authors is often the algorithm reveals itself in a sort of rupture, when something goes wrong. That's when we realize, oh, hang on, there is actually an algorithm behind this. And so this is a little bit how I've started noticing algorithms in my own use of social media, particularly. When things go wrong, then all of a sudden there's these weird things that you start to notice. And that's what I want to start talking about. When is the algorithm visible? When do you notice it? And often you notice it when things go wrong. And so one of the key things that I think is really interesting around social influence is the way in which we are now being judged and measured and made valuable through algorithmic processes. And one of the key things that I started noticing is when Twitter put a cap on my follower count, or when I couldn't follow any more people. So I was following 2,000 people, and I wanted to follow some more people, but because at that time in October last year, I only had 1,657 followers, unbeknown to me, there is a ratio that they have of followers to following, which means that I'm not influential enough to be allowed to follow more people. And so I didn't know that. I mean, did anyone know that Twitter has this cap? And you only find out some of these restrictions when you hit the extreme, when you kind of click, oh, this is an interesting person, and then Twitter says, no, you're not allowed because you're not important enough. And they have some examples as to why they do this. So they say, I looked at their help center, they say we do monitor how aggressively users follow other users. So of course this has a lot to do with spam and so on, but I mean, I'm not a spam bot, so I was just thinking, well, but you know I'm human, you know I have been engaging with your service for over 3 years, what's going on here? And I discussed this with a lot of people and nobody knew that there was this 2,000 cap, which made me think about how does this social influence work? What are other ways in which we are being judged as potentially useful, productive users of these spaces? So I started looking at some of my friends. This is Jennifer Jones, and I noticed that Jennifer has substantially more people she's allowed to follow, but then her following ratio is quite in sync. So it's about 3,500 in both cases. And my friend John Hickman, who at that time was following just under 1,000 people, but he has more than 3,000 followers. So I started noticing, oh, that's quite interesting, that Twitter makes an assumption, makes a judgment about what you are allowed then in terms of following further people. Which of course brings me to cloud scores, where these services have now sprung up, Cloud and Peer Index. And just out of interest, how many people have a cloud account and know their cloud score? Hands, please. Okay, so that's not that many, a few. So this is, of course, where I then started thinking next. And I have an account. And so this was in October last year. My cloud score was 52, which I guess is okay. I can show it without too much shame. But it made me think about how these numbers are constructed and how these numbers are increasingly being made meaningful and say something about us, right? What does this number start to say about me as a person on the internet who may or may not have influence, right? So, of course, these scores run on algorithms that look at what I'm doing, what I'm talking about. And so I was quite taken by the fact that, according to Cloud, my areas of expertise are sleep deprivation. I mean, this week it's quite appropriate, I think. Sleep deprivation, Facebook, and community. I don't really understand where these topics of influence come from, but they come from algorithms. And they partly come from algorithms, and they partly come from the interaction of other users who say, through the +K system, who can say that I have an expertise in a certain area. So maybe there are people out there who say I'm an expert in sleep deprivation. Who they are, I would have to check what I'm being influential on, but it's very interesting how this kind of interaction between the algorithm, churning all this data, the interaction of other users, and then also the gamification that is very strong in cloud. And I was very interested in that. So if you look at the top, I've only signed in with my Twitter account, but you can see that there's loads and loads of other different social application icons there that if I gave them kind of the keys to the kingdom, Facebook, my cloud score would go up a lot. And sometimes when I sign into cloud, I get these fairly sinister messages saying, well, if you also sign in with LinkedIn, we'll give you 6 extra points. But does that mean I'm more influential? No, it means I'm giving more away. I'm giving more data away. So I think you start to unpack, you start to figure out the algorithm, the company, and kind of what's going on. So if we move back to my friend Jennifer Jones, who's giving there the kind of the V's at question time, she's apparently an expert on social media, but also on fascism and Banksy. So again, you'd have to kind of unpack how did she get sort of authenticated, or how did she become influential on fascism? You would have to kind of look at what has she been talking about and who's been sort of saying these things about her. But I think what is most interesting about cloud is our friend John Hickman, who has a cloud score of 54, and this was in October last year, but he's not on cloud. He hasn't got an account. Cloud has made an account for him because he uses some of these social media services. And that means that he is being measured without his knowledge, without him actually saying, it's okay, I want to take part in this. Also, in terms of when things go wrong and when you really notice the algorithm, I noticed in the summer of last year that my score crashed from somewhere in the late 40s. It was a 10-point drop in one day. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out what happened until I realized that I signed in to cloud on my friend's machine that day. And I thought, okay, what is being revealed here? What is being tracked? What is being traced? And why is cloud responding through crashing my score? And so that's something I haven't quite figured out. But what is interesting is that you notice and you start to trace back what happened around that time, and you can only kind of come to the conclusion that it must be because I signed in on different machine. Peer index is the other surface. So on peer index last year, October, I had a score of 59. And they also have a series of benchmark topics, and they score you on how much expertise you have in these topics. So it's a little bit more granularity than cloud. But again, you get these bizarre topics that in my top topics is transportation and shipping. Why? I don't really understand that. How did the algorithm decide that I'm some sort of expert in transportation and shipping? And I don't really talk about, I'm using public transport. I just wonder where these things have come from. The fact that in my top topics is Twitter and technology, okay, that I can understand. Then there's Denmark as well. I think in my 9,000 tweets, I really don't think I've ever really mentioned Denmark. So where these things come from, that's really interesting, I think, to query. So if we move to Jennifer Jones, she's apparently an expert on Qatar. Where these things come from, again, and also on sports, because she was saying a lot of negative things about the Olympics. So the context is completely lost. But she has been turned into an expert because the Olympics fall under a theme. So this is natural language processing, where the assumption is, okay, she must be an expert on sport. Doesn't matter. Maybe if you connect this with the fascism expertise she's been awarded in cloud, it makes a little bit more sense. So what is interesting is how these services work in terms, not just their algorithms, but how they kind of bring users into the fold. So John Hickman, our friend, is not on peer index because peer index is based in the UK and they don't automatically sign you up. Cloud does. And so no profile's been created for him, so I cannot tell you what his expertise is. But what is interesting about these services is the kind of gamification element of them, that you get awarded perks, for example, once you go over a threshold of a certain score. So you get put into these bands. If you have more than 40 points in cloud, you get access to free nonsense like free business cards, cinema tickets and so on. But the higher your score becomes, and let's remember that this can become higher because you're giving them access to all your data, the perks really get increasingly interesting. And what is very interesting, that the New York Times last year or 2 years ago suggested that over 2,500 US companies are now using cloud data, particularly in terms of recruitment, and also in awarding bonuses and so on. And so if this is having effects in, say, the workspace, I think we need to really understand how these numbers come about. Because if you can gamify your cloud score and get 80 because you're an expert on sleep deprivation, and then get all sorts of perks that mean that you are in line for promotion, I think these are things to worry about. So this is Joe Fernandez, the chief executive and co-founder of Cloud, and he says for the first time, we're all on an even playing field. Well, not really. I mean, even playing field in what sense? Because you cheat and gamify, and that's not what's even about this. It's if you understand how the algorithms work and how you're awarded points, you can game the system and you can become more influential. So the way in which these companies are talking about the services that they're providing, I think are also very interesting. So this is, of course, all happening in the much larger hype of big data. Of course, for cloud, big data is not enough. It has to be giant data. And this is not me making this up. This is coming from their blog. They're talking about giant data. They're to sort of have the new edge. And what they're talking about is how they have more than 12 billion signals a day into a Hive data warehouse of more than 1 trillion rows. Now, I have no idea what this means, but it sort of sounds giant. And they also talk about hundreds of millions of user profiles, some of which have just been created without the knowledge of these users. But the point is that, and this is coming from their blog in October last year, the point is that they're building this kind of empire on data that either they're simply taking or we're gamifying and giving away. And if these companies grow further in influence, I think that we have to ask ourselves really serious questions about social influence online and how that translates into, and I sort of don't want to give myself a sort of a fatwa by saying real world influence, but I'm doing it anyway. I think these are really interesting things to understand at the level of the algorithm. So one of the things that drives this is natural language processing. So the ways in which machines understand and make sense of words and collocations in groupings of words. So kind of to extend the work on cloud, I looked at this really, really interesting project by Aaron Zinman called Personas, How the Internet Sees You. And this works on natural language processing. And basically, it's a sort of search engine format where all the different fragments of you online can be kind of pulled in and processed to create a data visualization about you. So, of course, I couldn't resist. And for your viewing pleasure, I did this. So, as the thing was developing, as the visualization was developing, I was, of course, very interested in how it was being produced. You know, what is the algorithm picking up on? What is the algorithm labeling? What is this natural language processing saying about me? So I noticed, because I was involved in a project with The Guardian called Reading the Riots, that was one of the things that they picked up on. But what they picked up on was both The Guardian and a blog post from a friend of mine, Ruth Deller. And so they started kind of awarding different colors to different kinds of activity. So red is my online persona, and of course yellow is my sport persona, which again makes no sense. So you start to see, where are those yellow words, right? So what is the algorithm giving that theme to? And it's words like team. Right? So basically the algorithm is saying team means sport. Okay, we're moving on. What other words are in there that mean sport, and so on. So what you start to see is a little bit how the algorithm works. So in terms of jobs, none of them could find my current job. So it's all going on past jobs. And then in blue, it's, for example, education. So the thing starts to kind of build along different lines. And then an old project that I did with Loughborough University started to show up as well. And all of this became part of education. So this isn't necessarily it is my job, but it's labeled as education because a lot of the words are, of course, university. And then this is the final thing. And then if you, the red is online, so my online persona. And then bizarrely, I have this very large sport persona because there's a lot of words like team and collaborate and so on. Education is in there. But then if you go towards the end, kind of bizarre things like illegal and legal. So I don't know what it is about some words that I've used or some words that are attributed to me that give me this bracket also of legal and illegal. Okay, one of the ways in which the algorithm reveals itself, or the workings of the algorithm, I think can be criticized really fruitfully, is when things go horribly wrong. And of course, look no further than Google Flu Trends earlier this year, which is an example that I'm sure most people in the audience are familiar with. When Google Flu Trends launched in 2008 and had a kind of a really big paper in Nature in 2009, one of the things that it highlighted was the accuracy level with which its predictions based on search were matched to official flu statistics delivered by the Center of Disease Control, the CDC. And what the CDC does is they measure through checking how many people have flu because they've actually gone to a flu clinic or they've gone to a medical center because they have flu, and they match that also with records of people who go to the pharmacy and purchase flu remedies. The data from Amazon could be up to 2 weeks faster because Amazon would model people searching for flu remedies and people searching for certain things to do with flu, and then would equate that with those people have flu. And between 2004 and 2009, if you look at the line graph that they proudly present on Google Flu Trends, they are very, very closely matched. Until 2013, when everything goes horribly wrong, because you have an unusual flu season in the States, which gets a lot of media coverage. So you get this massive false alert because loads of people are Googling flu, and Google Flu Trends is still saying people searching for flu-related terms have flu. Now, as a social scientist, I sort of shiver at the simplicity of that assumption that people searching for certain words means that they have the illness. And this was really revealed this year when the CDC had the flu rate at about 6% and Google had it at 11%. This is nearly double what it actually was. And so what these algorithms can bring into being is potentially panic buying and so on. So this is a good example, I think, from this year. Now, another example that I've been exploring is what I've called the algorithmic marriage of convenience, but the kind of the marriage is a bit broken up now and in very bad state. And this is linked to some work that I'm doing on Amazon. I think Amazon is very much under-researched in terms of it potentially being a social network site. And one of the ways in which I've been working on this with a colleague of mine, Elizabeth van Koevering, is we've started looking at what are the kind of the most used definition of social network sites and how can we map that onto the different functionalities that Amazon.com has had, you know, throughout the last few years. And so on a social network site, you can create a profile, of course. So you can create a profile on Amazon. They ask you to share all sorts of things with the service, share more about yourself, upload a picture, interest. So all the things that we are very used to when we sign up to, you know, another social network service. And there I am without any information because I didn't want to give them anything, apart from the fact that they have all my transactional data. And then you start to sort of look at, well, what are some of the other things that you can contribute to, or what are the things that you can do on Amazon.com? And so beyond doing the kind of one-click purchase, there's lots of things that you can do in terms of building out a profile, and people don't really, I think, understand how rich the environment is, the Amazon.com environment, in terms of different kind of communities, discussion groups, and so on. So people do lots and lots of other things on Amazon, of course, write reviews, build lists, upload images, different kinds of wish lists that you can upload. And then you also have privacy settings, what you want to share with everyone or what you want to keep private. Of course, there's lots and lots that is feeding into the recommendation system, and this is really what I became very interested in. How you know, you can look at your recent purchases and how these things can kind of feed in to the recommendation. So the wish list. You can do different things with your wish list. There's different functionalities. And then what I think is very interesting, how you are encouraged to improve your recommendation. And of course, how do they ask you to improve that is they want you to kind of look at your old purchases and then maybe like other purchases, right? So this is really where the marriage of convenience with, of course, the company being Facebook starts to emerge a little bit, where you think, okay, well, that's very interesting because that like button means that that Facebook is really very, very heavily and very deeply embedded in the fabric of the web. So Facebook, as a company, you may not have to have an account for Facebook to create, again, a profile on you. So any website that has a like button, if you visit this, Facebook will start to track you. Facebook will start to collect data on you. And so all of this kind of integration through the like button, I think is interesting, particularly if you look at what happened in the summer of 2010, when Amazon, who as a company are quite aggressive in terms of pursuing patents, were awarded the so-called social networking system patent. And in the technology press, this was very much seen as Amazon owns the Facebook patent, right? So if we read what the patent says, A networked computer system provides various services for assisting users in locating and establishing contact relationships with other users. For example, in one embodiment, users can identify other users based on their affiliations with particular schools or other organizations. The system also provides a mechanism for a user to selectively establish contact relationships or connections with other users and to grant permissions for such other users to view personal information of the user. The system may also include features for enabling users to identify contacts with their respective contacts. In addition, the system may automatically notify users of personal information updates made by their respective contacts. So a lot of this is legal jargon, but this describes just a very, very basic social network site. And it's really, really important that this giant behemoth of a company, Amazon, has been awarded the patent. Yeah? How many people knew about this patent? Okay. 2 very proud hands shoot up. Okay, so the context of this is really important, because what happens next is a perfect storm of a recommendation marriage where you can integrate and pull in your Facebook social graph into Amazon. So this happened in 2010 as an experiment. How many people knew about this? Again, okay. You should be very proud of yourself. I see this as Amazon every now and then experimenting, testing, right? What can they do? How do users respond to it? So what you had is the possibility to pull in your whole Facebook social graph through into Amazon. And this is what it looked like. It's all gone now. It sort of quietly went away because I think people really didn't like it. I think it kind of creeped people out. And so it tells you kind of all the steps. Yes, access my basic information. Yes, do that. And then here we are. What matters here is that it's not just Amazon selling on Facebook, but bringing your social graph on Amazon. Yay, brilliant. And of course, they kind of tell you about all the perks. And of course, where this leads is, this is genius. All your friends' upcoming birthdays, brilliant. We have all their data too. What do you want to give your friends for their birthday? You buy them stuff. So this didn't go down terribly well. I can sort of see why, but you can see also why one company owning a patent that potentially endangers another company and them entering potentially in this sort of marriage of convenience in trading data and encouraging users to bring in further data for the algorithms to work on, I think is a really, really interesting development, and I think a really interesting point in history to kind of look at more closely. And of course, all of this works in terms of your friends liking things and then you being able to purchase things for them. And of course, for Facebook, what we don't like about Facebook as an environment is that it's very aggressive in trying to now sell us things through selling us to advertisers. But I think as a space, Amazon, we come to purchase things. We experience that as a commercial space. So to marry the two, one space tells us what you like, and that's where you socialize, and then we bring you into the commercial space where you buy your friends' stuff. I think in terms of algorithmic development and this culture of the algorithm, I think it's a doomed experiment, but I think it's interesting. And you get these kind of uncomfortable things. Let's buy your boss a present. So they're making all of these kind of suggestions about who you might purchase for. Here is the boss. And then you can see what your boss has been looking at on Amazon, right? So if you didn't have the heart to not accept the friend's request of your boss, which I'm always very bad at, then you also see what this person has been looking at on Amazon, right? So what you gain access to as well in terms of privacy issues, potentially, are also big. So maybe you don't want to know that your boss is, I don't know, looking at certain novels or music or whatever. Wish lists, you can see all of this. So all of this kind of integration, see what movies he likes. So it's kind of going on and on endlessly about what's interesting. And of course the business press was very, very excited about this because this combines the social graph with recommendation systems in a larger environment where both can kind of work together. Now this went away quietly, but I had to have a Skynet slide in here. What it made me think about is, are we kind of falling out of love with this kind of increasing rise of the machines, right? This increasing rise of algorithms telling us what to purchase, telling us what to like, and then making all these recommendations for us. And this is all kind of going through, of course, machine algorithms with human data updates in terms of us clicking buttons and so on. But my question very much is, where are the humans in this? You know, where is the kind of the real human face? And what I think is interesting in sort of the last 12 months is almost this kind of return of the human, the critiques that are really emerging around big data. And I include myself in someone who is kind of contributing to those critiques and really asking tough questions about what can these, you know, machine algorithms really tell us in terms of insight, in terms of meaning. And so I was really interested in this new music surface, which Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails is involved in with Dr. Dre, which just seems also an interesting kind of marriage. And what they are offering is a counter service to Spotify. So Spotify fully runs on kind of machine algorithms and very much works on what you've been listening to, what else you might like, but it's all kind of the machine doing the work. And what they are pitching Daisy at is, what is missing is a system that adds a layer of intelligent curation. As great as it is to have all this information bombarding you, there's a real value in trusted filters, meaning humans. Right? So this is the kind of the connoisseur, the return of the connoisseur. It's like having your own guy when you go into the record store who knows what you like, but can also point you down some paths you wouldn't necessarily have encountered. So what this is kind of harking back to is an experience where someone knows you personally and may make recommendations that are based on different things that are beyond the reach of the algorithm, if you like. And what I think is interesting, if we go back to Amazon, is that, of course, Amazon's first algorithmic recommendation system, they were just humans, right? So this is just before they went public in '96. And so this is from an interesting book called One Click, Jeff Bezos and the Rise of Amazon, which really kind of explains some very nice bits of history of Amazon. And so they say soon Amazon's human editors were recommending books to customers based on similar purchases they'd made in the past. So what I think is interesting about understanding this algorithmic culture is, if you look at some of these companies that are now very, very big in terms of machine learning and machine algorithms, they started often with very basic recommendation systems who are just like a bunch of guys. And that's the case with Amazon. The other thing that's very interesting about Amazon at this point is the suggestion that Amazon wasn't just selling, just a selling site, it became an early social network site for books. And I think this idea of Amazon already in the mid to late 90s foreseeing the possibilities of social networking sites is a history that we need to understand better if we want to, I think, understand algorithmic culture today. And so one of the things that's interesting is that Bezos was buying up companies left, right, and center already from the mid to late 90s. So this company that they bought, I think in 98, Planet All, was a very, very rudimentary infrastructure for a social network site. Why is Amazon buying all this stuff, right? Why is Amazon buying all these patents? So I think in order for us to understand more about this algorithmic culture today, I think we need to think about, what is going on with this kind of return of what I would call the human algorithm, the human expert, the connoisseur. And to understand this better, I think one very fruitful era to explore is what was going on in Silicon Valley around the dot-com era and the dot-com burst, and particularly companies that survived, like Amazon. And what were they buying? What were they purchasing in terms of patents? And I think in order to understand the algorithmic culture we are in today, I think patents are a very fruitful source. They're very, very boring to read, but they're, I think, a very fruitful source for understanding better also the experiments that these companies are having. So I think the Amazon Facebook full integration experiment, that obviously didn't really go anywhere, but I think all of this recent history of the last sort of 20, 25 years will really give us, I think, an interesting glimpse into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Farida. What I want to do is basically ask Usman to do a response to Farida's talk and kind of draw out the similarities and connections that also exist within the physical space. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards we'll kind of we'll bring questions from the floor, and we'll start a discussion. So, Usman.
Thanks. Yeah. So these are just kind of notes quickly drawn up here because I hadn't really been thinking about it. Been looking forward to sit in the audience and sort of be the passive receptor of some of this wisdom. But the thoughts I've been having listening to this, the talk, which is largely about the web world, I suppose, and my interest is in the physical world, extending on from that, because in some sense, the kinds of techniques that we have heard are really obvious. Of course, Amazon and Facebook are going to use these little tricks because their basic goal, their reason for existence is to make money. I mean, that's why they go to IPO. And so commercialization and monetizing and improving those little margins kind of depend upon the ability to shift just by sort of 0.01% of adoption or what have you. And so really what the concern is, I think, for us is this kind of homogenizing effect that all of this can have, where you are recommended the things that are recommended to your friends, and therefore the people you agree with tend to be the people that you agree with more, and you sort of have this potential effect of kind of clustering. Now in all this, I should say that I would feel much more comfortable if Kevin Slavin were up here. I don't know if you've seen his TED talk, but he's I think it's called How Algorithms Shape Our World. He really kind of goes deeply into this. And I wanted to just read out a quote from The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, which has been on my mind, particularly because of the lifts here in this building. I go up, said the elevator. They've just walked into the lift. I go up, said the elevator, or down. Good, said Zaphod. We're going up. Or down, the elevator reminded him. Yeah, okay, up, please. There was a moment of silence. Down's very nice, suggested the elevator hopefully. Oh, yeah? Super. Good, said Zaphod. Now will you take us up? May I ask you, inquired the elevator in its sweetest, most reasonable voice, if you've considered all the possibilities that down might offer you? So this is the idea that, we're building these kind of automated systems for us. And frankly, the more intelligent they get, the more conversant they get, the more likely it is that we're not going to like them, right? In the same way that an intelligent, an intelligent person, as much as you might sort of enjoy the sort of intellectual stimulation of talking with him or her, is not necessarily the person that you want to go and have a beer with. And I think that this is really important to be thinking about in the sort of design of these algorithms. And so the thing that I think that we're not seeing yet is when the algorithms change in response to us understanding the algorithms. Because at the moment we're able to prod the algorithms kind of in this way, and we're able to sort of expose some aspects of it. But when you're actually talking to a human being, and you could argue that the process of conversation is the process of trying to understand and sort of put yourself within their frame of reference. And what happens over time and what makes a conversation really engaging is when that sort of, and here I hate to get too mechanistic about it, but the way our sort of mutual algorithms start to adapt and change over time. And the algorithms that we see in our technological infrastructure so far are not adapting, except for a couple of examples that I wanted to bring. One is, how many people have heard of Haim Bodek? So Haim is a very old friend of mine who I only know because I met on the bus in 1996 going to the American Society for Cybernetics conference. And at the time he was actually developing algorithms for credit card fraud processing, and he went on to work in the sort of financial industry and then got involved in high frequency trading. And about a year or two ago, because he really was deep into the HFT business, he discovered a massive flaw in the high-frequency trading business. And he became basically a whistleblower because it turned out that there was literally billions and billions of dollars going to companies that really shouldn't have been going to if the algorithms, as he understood it, were operating correctly. And he reported this to the SEC, and there's a massive investigation going on right now. Now, what's really interesting to me is that if you Google his name, you will find out all of this stuff. So it's there. But for some reason, the algorithms that enable us to see these news stories don't push those kinds of stories in front of us. So this is a very major financial issue in the US. But even I, as a close friend of him, didn't know it until he told me about it. So I find this very interesting, that it's almost as though the algorithms of the sort of industries that propagate the news around the financial information have adapted to cover up the stories about the algorithms. And so this is this is a little bit chilling to me. And the other example I wanted to give is we're now hearing about self-driving cars that are coming on. And this is something that actually gives me a bit of optimism here, because the self-driving car, let's imagine the roads are full of these self-driving cars that are full of all sorts of algorithms for protecting human life and not sort of bumping into each other and what have you. Now imagine that I, wanting to disrupt a road, what do? I just walk out in front of it. I just walk out into the street, and the cars are all going to swerve around me, and they're going to come to a complete stop, and I can stop a highway just by walking into the fast lane. Now, at the moment, I can't do that because there aren't self-driving cars, and there's a real risk that something's going to run me over. But in the world of self-driving cars, I can actually disrupt everything because the algorithms are going to protect me. And here you can kind of think of the Asimov laws of robotics. Unless somebody decides that you can offload to the machine, this self-driving car, the value of human life, and there might again be some kind of uncertainty. So the question is, when you have a self-driving car that is able to say, you know what, sometimes it's okay to run over a person, that's clearly going to have to be a question that's asked at some point. Anyway.
Right. Thank you, Usman. Do you want to respond to that, or shall I take some?
No, I think those are really interesting examples, and I agree that the sort of the real world scenarios, the material scenarios, I think Martin Dodge would have covered those really, really nicely. I think the self-driving car also reminds me of some of his work on navigation systems, and again, when things go wrong and what effects do those have, and so on. So thanks. That's a really interesting comment.
Right, I'll open it up to take questions from the floor. So has anybody got any questions they want to put forward? All right.
That was really interesting. I was just wondering, the algorithms, you talk about the return of the human, but the algorithms in the first place are coded by people. So it's kind of made me think that maybe it's less, it's about humans then coming in and error correcting the humans in the first place. So there's the people, then there's the code, and then there's the people again. So it made me wonder about whether those two kinds of people, the people that are coding the algorithms, are different to the people then stepping in afterwards and looking at how the algorithms work, whether it's about, sort of personality in that framework.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good comment. Thank you. The reason I put it as the return of the human is because I think the original human gets forgotten, right? The algorithm appears almost as if it sort of was created out of thin air. And we forget that algorithms are created by humans and that there are choices. And I think what is really important in understanding all of the implications that I suggested and that were suggested just now is trying to get at that level of how were they created in the first place and what choices and so on. And of course they're made by humans, but I think in the era of big data specifically, there is a sort of scientification wanting to erase the human hand in the process, right? So you want to be able to say, no, there's a very scientific process, the machine found all these patterns, and do you see what I mean? And of course, there's a human, involvement in lots and lots of different steps of that process. And particularly, I just read a paper on data visualization. The involvement and meddling of humans is enormous in data visualization. If you think about the way in which a visualization is an extreme reduction and throws away 99% of what is unique about the original data object, all of those stages go through human hands, yet what is produced at the end is seen as quite scientific somehow. And so it's, what I'm also interested in then is the kind of the interface, the idea of the interface of showing and hiding, and what is hiding a lot is the human.
Just to follow on from that, I think the question of visualizations actually is a really big topic, and I totally agree with what you said. But I think that one of the interesting things about algorithms is the propensity to which they're not written by human beings. In other words, there is a whole class of algorithm known as genetic algorithm, where essentially there is an algorithm that determines what algorithms work the best. And in that case, and this almost applies, I think, to every algorithm, the human act is actually to define the fitness function. And the fitness function is the thing that basically says, this is the parameter that I want to improve or to increase or to optimize for. And so what's interesting to me is that, essentially what that kind of operation does is it encodes a goal. So behind all of this is somebody's got a goal. And the question of how to expose that becomes really
But that's why your
important.
example of PageRank is so important, and the example of you not being able to see the kind of the news about your friend is what are the PageRank has had like 20,000 updates since it was created in '99. But what is interesting about that is the way in which it pulls in social media data, the way in which all of a sudden certain types of online behavior like link sharing massively influence PageRank, right? So I think those things are really important, but I think you do have to understand them as human choices. There's a choice you make to update an algorithm to pull in data and weight it in a certain way. I don't think that's the algorithm deciding, okay, live shared links are now massively important. That's a human, right?
Yeah.
Can I take a question from the front here, please?
Well, actually, I think partially been covered by the discussion here, but I was wondering whether in this era of really big data, somehow we cannot do without having an algorithm. So isn't the problem all about making the algorithm and the human behind transparent? So somehow in the direction of what you were saying, Usman, so the idea that what is missing now is to see the algorithm, to really understand what are the principles behind, and make that transparent should be probably the first step.
That actually, I suppose, echoes one of the points that Anthony Townsend just made in the opening talk as well.
But making things transparent, again, if we go back to what Usman was saying about, well, these are companies, this is a capitalist kind of system. Transparency, you don't want to be transparent because that's your competitive edge gone. You don't want to explain how PageRank works. Why would you want to do that? You want to make loads of money and pull in lots of data. So I agree, I completely agree with the transparency argument, but I think it's a big hope in a world that has different principles.
Gentleman over there.
Hi. Yeah, I think it's interesting. We've got questions about the motivation of algorithm builders and data set providers and companies that recruit people to understand the tech and make this stuff work. Addressing that motivation, I'm both a technology builder and a coder kind of person, and I need to quote bomb the statement, you're not the consumer, you're the product. I don't know if anybody's heard that said about Facebook frequently, regularly and consistently. But how do we solve it? Should we give people the capacity to build their own algorithms, to understand what they're doing when they're building it, and to realize that that's actually why the computer's useful, that it processes things and makes decisions?
Well, I think that sort of links to the point I just made, that these algorithms are created within a capitalist system. So we exist in a capitalist system that encourages companies to see us as a product. So I think it's a much larger question about whether or not those infrastructures are the ones we want to keep, or are the ones that we continue to invest in. So it's not just a question, I think, of algorithms, then it's a much larger one.
Is there then a process by which large amounts of data and the processing of those large amounts of data can be put in the hands of individuals?
Well, what I do think is really interesting is these new movements, like I don't know if you've heard of We the Data, these kind of pushback movements. There's quite a nice TED talk by Jared Thorpe, who's a data visualization artist, who talks about how we are always talking about third parties, right? So in the space of innovation and in terms of data reuse, it's always pushed towards the opportunities it creates for innovation by third parties, so app builders and so on. But of course, the content creators are the first party. So you have the first party, the second party, Twitter, Facebook, whoever, and then the third party. But we hear the most about the third party. And so what I think is interesting about these kind of pushback movements now is that they're really saying, we are the first party, kind of hear us roar. But the question, I guess, then becomes, what can those first parties establish within this system? But I do think it's interesting that you have, Jer also did a project where when it became known that the iPhone was tracking all your location data, that he built a platform where you can access that data easily, and then you as the first party, the data owner, can decide if you want to engage in a process of matchmaking with third parties who then might want to use your data for research purposes. And I think those kinds of moves are interesting because they go beyond the model where the third party just hoovers up data through an API without thinking about these data points as humans.
I want to take this gentleman here and then the gentleman at the back standing.
Following on from the idea that if you're not paying for it, you're the product, and also going back to what Trent Reznor was saying about connoisseurs, when you look at a service like Last.fm, it includes the algorithms like of your friends and things, but also all the tagging data of like the continual connoisseurs in it. It builds a greater system by including the person and the algorithm to bring them together. So do you think there's a future in including people in how you tag within the algorithms to create sort of people-facing, transparent algorithms that actually work better as a discovery tool?
Well, I think this is something that Julian and I, just before the panel started, we were talking about, that it's also something about user experience and how users value that experience. And I would very much encourage Julian to give the example that he just gave before the break, because I think it's a really interesting one in terms of what we invest in the idea that the machine is behind it or not.
So there's a notorious example of a company called Spinvox, which marketed itself as having incredibly powerful speech-to-text algorithms. And this was basically used by business users. And in 2009, users of the service started getting text messages saying, can you help us? We haven't been paid for X amount of months. And an investigation found it was actually cheaper than building an algorithm to actually have call centers in South Africa and the Philippines, where people were listening to these conversations, transcribing them, and sending them back to users as text messages. And what was interesting in that is that it showed that people were happy to give all their speech data to an algorithm, but not so much to a person. And so their business model kind of failed because it was people rather than an algorithm working. So it was
I think the context matters. So the Last.fm, maybe there in that kind of context, we very much welcome. So Daisy is also an example of a music service. We very much welcome this idea of the connoisseur. And maybe we will see this again also with Amazon, that they will start to return to this original idea of human recommendation as well. But more explicitly human recommendation rather than the humans feeding the algorithm because they're pressing buttons. And of course you have the reviews as well, but that's, I think, I don't really want to open Pandora's box.
Well, if you go to the engineering blog for Twitter on the 8th of January, and you scroll down and you find out how the recommendations for followers and feeds is done, step 2 of 3 is that they use Mechanical Turk.
Oh, well, there you go.
So,
Amazon is there as well with its grubby little fingers.
So it turns out that Twitter uses people ultimately to do their classification.
Right. I just want to tell people that we started late, but we are running over into the break slightly, and if people want to carry on, I think we're starting quite a nice conversation here. But I just want to warn you that we're starting to go into the break, and that lasts till 12 o'clock. Are people happy for it to continue just for a couple more questions? Fantastic. Can I go to the gentleman at the back, and then the gentleman in the green jacket there?
Can you put that link on the hashtag, please? It's
Sure.
a very good one.
So I'm really interested in kind of hacking algorithms, and I'm interested in also the fact that you're right that there are commercial companies and their ultimate kind of game is to sell stuff, or So I saw recently, I'm looking at the kind of the dating field, but I saw recently a company, or I won't mention a name, tell users to stop putting in more data, because what was happening is that their algorithm was struggling to keep up and to search through and to mine all the data that was given. And so they were told, stop, don't use that. They were restricted from putting in more information. So I'm wondering if there is a point in the future where you see the cost of running these algorithms and running these processes will actually bankrupt some of these companies. And is there a kind of an alternative that which is the least amount of data, just enough to get it going, but so the algorithm tries to infer all this stuff out of this person's profile, and actually the processing of doing that costs more than if it was a load of data.
I think the processing is a really interesting one, and I think the capacity to deal with large influxes of data or large influxes of users. So one of the things that I started noticing, and I don't really know why I noticed these things, but I noticed that I hadn't seen a fail whale in a while, and so the Twitter infrastructure, every time so many users sign up and so on, they have to keep scaling up. And the fail whale used to be like a huge feature, like it has its own Twitter account, it has, a huge kind of fan following. And so I started noticing that the fail whale had I hadn't seen it in ages. And again, this is every now and then there's a rupture for whatever reason and certain things emerge again. So the fail whale came back. And there was the case of the data centers in West Virginia going down in the electrical storm, and it taking down Netflix and all these things. And I guess what you see then beyond is the infrastructure of the cloud and what is in which cloud, and are they on the Amazon cloud and so on. And a lot of this is kind of a bit hidden and unknown. And I think what is really, really interesting is that, of course, a lot of this hinges on cables and electricity and the grid. And so I started thinking about, how can we think about Twitter outside of this kind of algorithmic structures, but how can we think about Twitter as a system that just basically needs electricity? And, how can you take it down, basically? So I made this kind of weird film about breaking the internet by basically making lots of cups of tea. And it was around the Olympics and all these fears around what might break, and I thought, well, one fear was that the internet might break, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that they were having people sleep in pods by the servers to protect the servers. I mean, I have pictures of this. People were sleeping in these weird capsules because they thought, oh my God, if Usain Bolt wins, everyone will turn on the kettle, the whole grid will explode, internet goes down because everyone's live streaming. So I think, I think that's really interesting, that capacity kind of scaling up. And so I think your example is really interesting in terms of algorithms, but I think it says a lot more about how companies have to struggle when they become successful, how these startups have to struggle with essentially a system that, relies on electricity.
Excellent. Actually, I'll just take the last question because I think that we all need to drink some water or something. So over to the gentleman there. And we'll wrap it up.
I just wonder if there's an inevitable animal farm quality to the whole cycle with humans and algorithms, where we don't like the centralization, we don't like the algorithms, so we say we'll build a network, we'll have small human things, and then let's put those together, and we'll put those together more, and maybe we can encode it, and then you end up back where you started with algorithms that we're all alienated from.
Well, I think definitely we are going, through cycles where things morph and change, and I don't think that now this, perhaps return or reemergence or increased importance of the human necessarily will then stabilize something, because I think we can look at other points in history where the human was much more valued and had a different role. So I just think your point about understanding it more as a sort of cyclical thing and understanding how there is a much larger history within which these processes develop, I think that's really interesting. And this is why I'm personally interested in understanding better what was going on in Silicon Valley in the mid-90s in order to understand what is going on now.
Right. Have you got anything further to say, Usman? Right, well, thank you very much, everybody, and especially thank you to Farida Viz and Usman
Thank
Haque.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.